right, welcome back. In this segment, we're going to talk about probably one of the more critical aspects of risk management and the risk management plan, and that's an emergency action plan, an EAP. Every agency that is engaged in dealing with the public, providing services to the public, must have an emergency action plan in place. You don't know when emergencies are going to occur, but what you can do is you can organize and plan your agency, its structure, and your employees, whether they're volunteer or full-time or part-time, so that they know what to do in the event of an emergency, and that you have taken reasonable precautions to minimize the injuries and accidents that can occur in the event that an emergency occurs at your facility and with your programs. All right, there's some minimum requirements that all emergency action plans need to have in place. The first one is there needs to be a means of reporting that an emergency has occurred. There has to be a way for you to contact, at a minimum, emergency services. Today that's pretty straightforward, but you need to plan for contingencies, plan for situations where, maybe cell phone service has gone down. Does your facility have a landline? Is there a landline closely accessible to some of the outdoor facilities that you may operate? Another minimum requirement is you have to have planned out evacuation routes. Now, for facilities like here, like Carter Finley Stadium, the evacuation routes have been very clearly planned out. And you have to think about it not from the perspective of, football game's over and people are coming out in a calm and orderly manner, maybe not so calm after a loss to Carolina, but you have to think about it from the perspective that something catastrophic has happened and you've got to get people out of here quickly. Are your evacuation routes and your procedures appropriate that they can stand that test so that people can get out quickly without creating danger to themselves or people around them? Another minimum requirement, are there some employees that have to stay behind at least for a period of time in the facility so that they can monitor certain systems or stay in communication with emergency personnel? So who's going to be responsible for that, and do they know when it's safe for them to leave, or when the conditions are so unsafe that they have to leave? Another minimum requirement of an emergency action plan is a way to account for all of the participants. Now, pretty unrealistic to try to account for everybody that's going to be here at an NC State football game, but a lot of the programs and services that we offer, soccer practices and programs that occur on a playground with before and after school care, you absolutely have to be able to account for everyone that is in your charge. So it's important that your emergency action plan has a way to count the people that are in your program and make sure that when you've successfully evacuated as a result of an emergency, that you can account for everyone that was there. Another minimum requirement is, do staff have any responsibility for providing medical assistance? And if they do, to what level are they expected to do that? So lifeguards, for example, have CPR and first aid training. So there's an expectation that they would provide some level of medical care. Most early childhood programs or programs dealing with children and full-time staff, there's a certain, again, first aid, CPR is probably a minimum requirement. So do they know what they're supposed to do, how far they're supposed to go, and then when they're supposed to contact 911 and get first responders in to deal with a situation that's gone beyond their level of training and experience? One of the final minimum requirements is there needs to be a contact person. So who is the contact person for your facility, for that program in the event of an emergency? And then what's the hierarchy of responsibility? Do people know who to report to? Do people know who's in charge? What's the chain of command? When developing your emergency action plan, there's some key things to consider. The first one is, under what conditions do you initiate an emergency action plan? Most of them are going to be obvious, but there may be some situations where there may be some question. So again, this is going to be dependent on the type of facility and the types of programs that are going on, but this is something that needs to be planned out in advance and trained and then train your staff in terms of what the plan is saying. So under what conditions do your staff know to initiate an emergency action plan? Second component would be under what conditions would it be better to shelter in place versus evacuating the building? So there may be some situations in a facility like this where it's better to keep people here than to send them out into a more dangerous situation. There was an incident here this past year where there was a big concert going on across from PNC Arena over in Carter Finley Stadium, and severe weather came in, so they had to evacuate everyone from that facility. But again, we needed to get them into a place of shelter where they were safe. So fortunately, PNC Arena, right across the street from Carter Finley Stadium, people could move from there over to here and were able to shelter in place in this particular facility. All right, another part of the emergency action plan is coming up with a very clear chain of command. Evacuation or emergency situations can get out of control very quickly if people don't know who's got the authority to do what. Someone needs to be in charge, and people need to know exactly who that person is and that clear chain of command to make sure that everything runs smoothly and efficiently. The next part that seems to be pretty obvious is there needs to be very clear routes and exits for people to go. So is your building, is your facility, I mean, buildings are a little easier because they have clearly marked exits and very planned out, in most cases, routes for people to escape. However, there's a lot of programs and services that go on in outdoor environments, sometimes that weren't originally designed to have that many people. So you may need to take a proactive approach and evaluate that on a more flexible basis. What happens when you run events and festivals in your communities and you close off the main street and you've got thousands of people downtown for an activity? Have you planned out an emergency action route and exits in situations like that? Your emergency action plan should account for and deal with all types of visitors and employees that are in your programs and services and in your facilities. Do you have a plan in place if people don't speak English? What about people with disabilities, have mobility issues that can't get out quickly as other people? Do you have a plan in place for dealing with those types of issues? Do employees require any special equipment during emergency procedures? A way to communicate, intercommunicate? Do they have a walkie-talkie system? What happens if the public announcement system, say in a building like this, goes out? Do you have a way to communicate with the staff in order to ensure that everybody gets out safely? When you're evaluating the evacuation routes for your emergency action plan, it's really important that you look at all of the points of egress out of your building and try to imagine that it's all happening at one time. So this is a great example. So under normal conditions, a game here at PNC Arena would end and people would gradually and calmly move out of the building. Now imagine you've got 18,000 people sitting in here, and all of a sudden there's a bomb threat or an active shooter and people are rushing to get out at the same time. Well, this can become a very dangerous situation very quickly because it creates a choke point of people going out. So how do you plan for that particular event? How do you train your staff? There's staff posted, there's ushers posted through here, there's security personnel around the building. So is there a way that you can move people out in a reasonably safe manner, recognizing that there's always going to be situations where you're going potentially can lose control? And again, the courts are going to look at it from the perspective, did you have a plan in place? Did you train your staff under normal circumstances or even in the event of emergency? And did you do what was reasonably and prudent? So it's important to understand where the possible problem areas can be and at least try to plan for those events that are going to occur. All right, a key part of an emergency action plan is having access to and being able to contact emergency first responders, emergency medical service, whether that's fire or medical. It's critical that, again, your staff know how to contact them, and again, most communities across the country, that's going to be 911, so that's pretty easy to train. Most people know about that. But do they know specifically the information that they're supposed to provide? You know, where emergency services are supposed to come, how to get to your facility. Are there any special considerations or concerns that they need to be aware of as they come to your facilities? Are there chemicals? Are there chemicals stored in certain areas? Golf courses have specific chemicals that they use and are stored. Swimming pools have chemicals. Emergency services needs to be aware of those things that they're coming in. You need to provide them with information on the type of event and the number of people and the types of injuries and those kinds of things. And while it seems like that would be logical in most cases and people would be able to provide that information, we don't know how we're going to respond in a very stressful situation. So training and practicing of these things is really, really important so that when it does happen, your staff have a better chance of doing the right thing and providing the right information. The final piece in an emergency action plan is after an emergency occurs, a couple things should happen. One, reporting needs to be done. If there were people that were injured, obviously accident reports need to be completed. A full reporting of what happened, what caused the emergency. Is it something that's preventable? Looking back at what precipitated this to occur, and are there some holes or gaps in your safety and security measures? Are there some holes where staff maybe weren't trained as well as they could have or should have been? So reporting what was done so that you have documentation, but then just as importantly, evaluate what happened and is there an opportunity for you to improve upon the policies, procedures, and practices that are in place in the event of emergencies.